So good evening, people. Thank you so much for being with us. This is the first time we have been doing a masterclass over 4 sessions, but ArtRadio since November last year has done 32 episodes of talks with various experts on various topics, which are historically important as well as politically important. And this continues through these sessions with Dr. Alone, which are extremely important. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Alone. Somewhere I have notes. So Professor Yashdatta Somaji Alone, it teaches at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at JNU in New Delhi, which automatically tells you a little bit about where we are going with this. His research interests and publications are on ancient Indian art, Buddhist caves in Western India, critics of modern Indian art, popular neo-Buddhist visual culture, interpretive framework of Dr. Ambedkar, which is why we're here, and social sciences. He was nominated as the ICCR chair, visiting professor in Shenzhen University, China, and as a short-term visiting professor in Beijing, Shanghai, Madrid, Heidelberg in Germany. He's also served as a member of various committees of the Government of India. His book, published in 2014 on early Western Indian Buddhist caves, forms and patronage, also ties into what we are going to be discussing today. Because we're discussing how Dr. Ambedkar has moved Buddhism on from the original form of Buddhism that we knew in this country to the fourth kind of Buddhism. He has evolved a critical conceptual formulation termed as protected ignorance and has published papers on it. Dr. Alone, it's all yours. I don't know if you're on mute. Can you just check if you're on mute or not?
No, I'm not mute. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. To me, you are.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ritika. I don't know how many people have joined, but I hope
30. So far, it says 30.
30. Okay, fine. Well, we need to see as to how certain things came in the interpretative sphere. Just hold on. Yeah. So in the interpretative sphere, how certain things get set, and of course we need to go to the colonial politics. In this case, it is pertinent. Am I visible? Hello?
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 Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. Fine. So yeah. So the role of Anagarika Dhammapala is very important to understand the revival of Buddhism in India. And when he visited Bodh Gaya in 1885, and also there is a creation of Mahabodhi Society, which was established in Colombo and then Kolkata. So in Kolkata, it was established in 1892, and Anagarika Dhammapal was very instrumental in establishment of the Mahabodhi Society. Then there is a revival of Bodh Gaya Shrine, which Anagarika Dhammapal pursues through the British administration during that time. And then we have very important person that emerges in the late 20th in late 19th century. That is, there are two people. One is Mahatma Phule, and second is Ayotitas. Mahatma Phule was very different, and I must say, he is the father of non-Brahmanical interpretative framework in India. And then another person, almost little junior to him, was Pandit Ayotitas, who also made the non-Brahmanical interpretation of Buddhism. And then we have a lot of other people who followed, mainly Swami Dharmatirtha and then we had emergence of Dr. Ambedkar. So how there is this interesting journey by Dr. Ambedkar. I don't want to go into the biographical sketch of Dr. Ambedkar, but there are certain important some important years which are very necessary to note. That he does, he did Mahar Satyagraha, very well-known agitation for the access of the water tank. It was the first civil right, or rather, first human right agitation in India. This was way back in 1927. And then in 1930, he also launched the temple entry agitation at Mahad. And then we have 1932, there was a Pune Karar, Pune Pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar, which is very well known. However, in 1935, in Yevla conference, he declares that though I was born as a Hindu, but I will not die as a Hindu. And in the same year, he started writing his Annihilation of Caste. And then one also has to see that when you see the images, photographic images, which are available now of 1945, where Dr. Ambedkar is addressing to his people, to his followers, where the image of Buddha is very visible on the podium. And we do have the photographic evidence of that. Similarly, in 1946, we have establishment of Siddharth College, Mumbai. So the very name Siddhartha, of course, related with Buddha, and he adopts that name very clearly. And then in 1950, we have establishment of Milin College in Aurangabad. So these are very important markers to understand his leaning towards Buddhism. And then in 1953, there is a Scheduled Caste Federation meeting, and there is also photographic evidence where the Scheduled Caste Federation is translated as, in Marathi, it is written as Dalit Federation. And he's asking his followers to get ready for conversion. So this was in 1953. And then in March 1956, he established, there is an establishment of Buddha Vihar at Chakki Pat in Agra in 1954. We also had the establishment of he lays the foundation stone for the Buddha Vihar in Pulgaon near Wardha in Maharashtra. And then in 1954, he attends World Buddhist Conference, and prior to that, he also goes to Sri Lanka, and he presents the paper called Rise and Fall of Hindu Women to the Young Buddhist Society. And interestingly, the president of the society, he said with a smile that, he said that Dr. Ambedkar, someday you will certainly become a Buddhist. You are going to get converted to Buddhism. And Dr. Ambedkar simply nodded his head. And then in 1954 itself, there is an establishment of Buddha image at Dehu Road, Dehu, near Pune. So there's a famous Buddha Vihar in Dehu, where Dr. Ambedkar had inaugurated that Vihar was inaugurated by Dr. Ambedkar, and there is a establishment of the Buddha image in that particular Buddha Vihar. Then we have 1956 again. He visits Chakki Pat and also inaugurates that particular Buddha Vihar again. And then there is 1956, there is a celebration of Buddha Jayanti at Mumbai. And these are the photographic, these are all the there are these photographic evidences. And then 56, you have the conversion. So these are some of the important events in his life where you can see the leaning towards Buddhism. However, I will speak exclusively on Dr. Ambedkar's Buddha and His Dhamma as to how he has formulated and sailed through many ideas. So there is a colonial rediscovery of India through two traditions. One was archaeological, another was textual. The textual tradition, there was an emphasis on the discovery of the Brahmanical text, and as well as there is a discovery of the Buddhist text. So therefore, the Buddhist history or the very understanding of Buddhism or the personality of Buddha was getting read through the textual tradition. And there is another interesting thing that happened in colonial India, that Buddhism was a dead religion in India. I mean, it was existing only in the hills, mainly the Himalayan ranges, that is Ladakh, parts of Kashmir, and Himachal, and then West Bengal and the northeast area. Whereas in the plain area, there was a very minuscule Buddhist population, and it was almost like a negligible kind of a things, and they hardly had any kind of a manifestation, public manifestation as such. And those so-called claim Buddhist, they very much became part of the upper caste Hindu society rather than dismantling that consciousness of the caste. Then being a dead religion, and when the scholars started studying Buddha, so they always compared, the Westerners always compared with the image of Christ, because that compassionate and a very different kind of a persona. And there has been that kind of a comparison. And therefore, you will notice that the ways in which Christianity was studied in Europe, in a similar way, they attempted to study Buddhism, and the Buddhist sects were also studied on those lines, and it became a big failure. Even now, also it is a big failure when it comes to the sectarian history, or when it comes to the so-called differences in the sect. A lot of scholars they make big uh, they make big blunders when it comes to the study of the sects. So the concept of divinity and was something which was very much part of the textual tradition, and many people have started understanding Buddhism from the point of view of divine and sacred. So that concept of divinity is one thing which was very much there, and therefore there was no room for any kind of a scientific analysis of the religion as such. The Brahmanical tradition regarded Buddhism as an offshoot of Vedic tradition. So for Brahmanism, everything originated from Vedas. So there is this whole idea of homogeneity of tradition that gives emphasis. And as if everything emanated from Veda. And then there is an emphasis on the avatar Vada. So Buddha was seen more as the avatar of Vishnu, and was being seen from the avatar theory. Now, in this context, how certain things really happen. In the previous that his father was Ramanandi, and then Ramanandi and Kabir Panthi. And though he did not believe in the idol worship, but he indeed was celebrating Ganpati Puja. That is what Dr. Ambedkar wrote. He also mentions that the biography, the book on Buddha, was gifted to him by Keduskar Guruji as a part of he being honored for getting matriculation, because he was the first matriculate among the scheduled caste community. And therefore, he was honored, and it was who gifted him the book, which was published by Baroda Oriental Institute. Basically, there are these, the Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad had the study of the textual tradition, and so likewise you have Bhandarkar Oriental Institute, then you have Baroda Oriental Institute, and interestingly, the critical edition of the Mahabharata was prepared by Bhandarkar Oriental Institute, whereas the critical edition of the Ramayana was made by Baroda Oriental Institute. Nevertheless, the Keduskar Guruji being a non-Brahmin and coming from Maratha community, so how this idea really played an important role, precisely because Buddha remained anti-caste figure in the Saint poetic tradition. And it is through that Keduskar Guruji writes the biography of Buddha, whatever things were available during that time, and also the message of the Buddha, the philosophical aspect of the Buddha. So that's an interesting book which was written in Marathi, which deeply impacted Dr. Ambedkar. And he writes, he confesses that in the preface of Buddha and His Dhamma. And then he also says that, my father was a Roman patriarch. So that's how he makes a critique of his own father. He also acknowledges the medical care that was made by Dr. Shankar and then he wish I could write like Ashwaghosh. And he candidly admitted that that no one can excel the poetry of Ashwaghosh. That is what he said. And very interestingly, post-independent India, when Sahitya Academy brought out a book, they brought out a book on Ashwaghosh, and there they declare that it is the greatest poet, far superior than Kalidas. That is what the Sahitya Academy book says. And everyone admits, because the adjectives, the signifiers, and the ways in which certain things it composed. So that poetic imagination is quite different than even Kalidas and all. So that is how Ashwaghosh is analyzed. And the preface, which is published in annotated edition by Akka Singh Rathod and Ajay Verma, there, actually that is the original preface, and they were given that particular copy by Dr. Elinor Zeliot. And what is published by the People's Education Society in 56 is quite different. Now I move on to these things, that there is a mention of Dada Keduskar in his preface, and he said that it was a starting point for him. Now, what is a shift? How we see the shift in Ambedkar's writings? He began writing on ancient India. Caste in India was the first text he produced while he was in Columbia, and in Columbia he studied not only economics, but also other two subjects he studied. One was anthropology, which was basically a social anthropology, and another was philosophy, and the third subject was history. And this is very beautifully narrated in a book, the biography of Dr. Ambedkar by Akka Singh Rathod in his recent publication. It beautifully describes his journey, his intellectual pursuits in Columbia and as well as in London, that how he actually lived and where did he go and all kinds of things. So it's a beautiful narration. And there he recorded that he found the Columbia documents, what he studied. So he studied philosophy, and his teacher was a great philosopher in Columbia. And he studied history and he studied social anthropology along with his economics as a subject, main subject. That was his main PhD degree subject. So in this particular essay, he opposed the imperial discourse and the theory of race. He completely disagreed with this whole idea of theory of race as a part of understanding of the caste. And I don't want to go into too much of the details of what he exactly said, but this is very, very important. And then came his Annihilation of Caste, which is completely a different text. And that is where you find a philosophical leaning of Dr. Ambedkar and also using the Buddhist logic for the analysis of the Indian society. So you do have the idea of endogamy, which becomes an important characteristics to understand the caste societies in India. There are a number of other things. So and there is enormous writings nowadays on this particular issue. So I don't want to repeat those things. It is very easily you can you can write through many, you can read through many sources. So Annihilation of Caste is one text which completely, I mean, there is this the idea of anatta, impermanence, and the theory of pratyuta samutpad is categorically used as a part of analytical tool, and he also formulated these rules and principle, the logic of rules and principles, which becomes a very important critical framework. And one can see how Dr. Ambedkar understood Dewey, but at the same time, it is not I mean, the way Mirananda would like to portray Ambedkar's Deviant Buddha, which is I completely disagree with it. It's not a Deviant Buddha he constructs. It's a very different kind of a Buddha he constructs, but he uses those philosophical uh, 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 philosophical discourses as well as the interrogations. I mean, use the word interrogation. That is more appropriate word. So he uses that philosophical interrogations, and constantly you will notice that Ambedkar was very much aware of what was happening in the European and American academia as far as philosophy was concerned, and who are the people who are considered to be the great philosopher and something, and so on and so forth. Often he is criticized as far as writing historical texts are concerned, or writing on history is concerned, that he's a political scientist. He's not something who is, the who is trained historian and all. I mean, these are all the all idiotic things that have been written about Ambedkar. Let me tell you, even person like R.S. Sharma, when he writes his preface or some introduction to Shudras in ancient India, he talks about Ambedkar's book, Who Were Shudras. I mean, and he also writes that the lower caste people in India have a tendency to prove the high origin of the Shudras, high caste origin of the Shudras. That is some kind of a comment he makes. It clearly shows even your Marxism or you being a leftist does not empower you to see the things rationally. This is a fantastic example. Now, interestingly, the conclusions which Sharma arrived and the conclusions which Dr. Ambedkar had already made are almost the same. There is no difference. And Mr. Sharma criticizing Dr. Ambedkar, saying that on one single evidence of Paijavana, Dr. Ambedkar constructs these things. While writing ancient history, we do take into account each and every evidence available. Say, for example, we have only one inscriptional evidence which talks about the Sutradhara in Ajanta paintings. And through that, we try to understand the nature of the activities, art activities. So there are a number of such inscriptional evidences which are very important to understand. Say, for example, even the Pitagora inscription of that Kannadasa, who was a Suvarnakara, who was a goldsmith, and he did the sculpting, stone sculpting. So there are only, these are the kind of an evidences we have, which are singular in nature. But we do consider them, and we do take put them in a righteous context. So this whole idea of single evidence becomes very dubious. So by 1941, you will notice that Dr. Ambedkar started studying the complex issues of the Varna and Jati. He also wrote about Swami Dharmatirtha's book, History of Hindu Imperialism, and who regarded Buddhism as nationalistic religion. And he also explained the conflict between the Brahman and the Kshatriyas in that particular book. And he also analyzed the Swami Dharmatirtha book, Swami Dharmatirtha, that how Brahmanism killed Buddhism in India. So it's a very important book which Dr. Ambedkar considered, and he is very much aware of these books. So in 46 he published his Who Were Shudras, and in 1948 again he published Untouchable as a sequel to Who Were Shudras. And there he considered that the untouchables were the Buddhist, and he quotes Narada Smriti, that how if you touch the Buddhists, the Kapalikas, the Jainas, and two more people, then you will have to purify your by taking a bath. So that's a very important evidence, and he considered that as part of practice of untouchability. Then Dr. Ambedkar was completely opposed to the nationalistic discourse, and he sees the society as Brahmanism versus Buddhism. Now, the important text he wrote was Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India. Now, how we get, it is published by Government of Maharashtra as a part of Writing and Speeches of Dr. Ambedkar, which is there in volume 3. But in the preface of Buddha and His Dhamma, he writes that I also want to publish two important books. That is Buddha and Karl Marx, because he goes to World Buddhist Conference and delivers that lecture, and also the Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India. So that shows that the revolution and counter-revolution in ancient India was not completed as such, but whatever manuscript the committee could find, it is published, and it also says that it is incomplete, or some certain part they could not get, so they wrote that it is incomplete and all. So that is how you see revolution and counter-revolution in ancient India. So the other important thing which I thought we should share, when he was invited to deliver lecture in, it is not invited to deliver a lecture. Actually, he attended the conference in Burma, World Buddhist Conference, and then the second was Nepal. So there he received an invitation to attend the conference. So he went to attend the conference, and after going there, he was requested to speak on Buddha and Karl Marx. So he agreed, and according to his wife, Maisai Ambedkar, when I had a personal conversation with her, so she told me that, she said it in Marathi. I would like to say it in Marathi, exact, but then I will translate it in English. She said, अरे नाही रे, डॉक्टर साहेबांना त्यांनी सांगितलं बोलायला आणि ते तयार झाले. संध्याकाळी डॉक्टर साहेब आले आपल्या रूम मध्ये आणि त्यांनी नोट्स काढले आणि सकाळी जाऊन बोलले. He was asked to speak on Buddha and Karl Marx. So Dr. Ambedkar came to his room and just jotted the notes and jotted the notes, and then he spoke extemporally. That is what she said. So it became a very seminal lecture, and then he converted into a text form, and that is how it is published as Buddha or Karl Marx, which is a wrong title, but actually it should be Buddha and Karl Marx. So there he explains the similarities, he also explains the dissimilarities, and at the same time you will notice that Dr. Ambedkar was complete completely disagreed with the Kantian logic as well as the Hegelian dialect and the Marxian dialect. Completely, you can read it very clearly and you can understand that. And even he is not interested in writing that history as an idea of zeitgeist, so which is something very different. And you will also notice that he is quoting the other Germanic philosophers who are not agreeing with this kind of a Hegelian dialect of writing history and understanding the world or understanding the phenomena. So this is and so he studied the text from the non-Vedic perspective, from the non-Brahmanic perspective. Thus, he disagreed with the Brahmanical interpretations of the text. He regarded Narsu's book in high esteem and wrote a preface in 1948. This book was published in 1907, and he said while writing that preface, people often ask me that which is a good book to read on Buddhism, and he says this is a good book. P.L. Nurse's book is a good book to understand Buddhism. And P.L. Nurse was a physicist, and he wrote from his own disciplinary paradigm, which became a very scientific kind of an understanding of some of the ideas of Buddhism. And Dr. Ambedkar wrote its preface, and while writing the preface, he says it very clearly that I am also working on some of those issues, because he says that there is a criticism against the teachings of the Buddha, and then he further adds that I'm myself working on the life of Buddha. This is what he says in 48. So uh, uh, so you can understand that how he was critically engaged with the textual tradition. Therefore, by 1948, he was already working on Buddhism, on Buddhism and understanding of the Buddhist Buddhism very differently. And in 1951, he wrote a critical note in the Journal of Mahabodhi Society, India, and where he said that Buddhist religion is the only one are suitable for the modern scientific world. So what he wrote in that particular journal, and the title of the essay was Buddha and Future of His Religion, which was published in 1950. So he contrasted between Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad and Krishna. There is a fantastic comparison. I don't want to go into the details of this comparison, but there is this comparison, and there he emphasizes that how Buddha called himself as Margadatta, the path giver, the one who can guide a path, and not the Mokshadatta, or the one who does not grant you the so-called salvation. And he emphasized the social morality aspect of the Buddha's teachings, and that he then defines in liberty, equality, and fraternity, which is a modern democratic principle which most of the world have adopted and are adopting gradually. He also writes very critically. He writes, to declare poverty to be a blessed state is to pervert religion, to perpetuate nice and to perpetuate vice and crime, to consent to make earth a living hell. So this is something which is very important to understand, that that this poverty should not be taken as something given, as if your destiny is written by the God, and that you have to live in an eternal poverty. So he was completely opposed to this particular logic, and I'm sorry to say this logic is still being believed and it is still being followed and the remedies that are being offered through the policy making of the government of India is not at all addressing the core of the problem. And this becomes a very, 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 I should say, this becomes extremely problematic to understand the policies in India, or the welfare measures by the government of India. Then in 1954, in AIR, All India Radio, he says that my philosophy has roots in religion and not in political science. He says, I have derived them from the teachings of my master, the Buddha. That is what he declares in 1954 in All India Radio. Now, just to explain why it is so. Precisely because he makes a critique of the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution. He says that French Revolution was all about liberty and it bypasses equality, whereas the Russian Revolution was all about equality, which bypasses the liberty. And he says both is not possible without fraternity. And he said that fraternity for me is compassion, that is karuna, Buddha's compassion. Because unless until you respect the fellow human being, you will not develop any kind of a fraternity, be it is from any region, be it is from any community, be it is from any religion. So anything. So you need to have compassion to develop fraternity. And this is very important because that makes the nation, because this becomes a fundamental condition to achieve liberty and equality in the society. So why he prefers Buddhism? So he says all other religions were bothering themselves with God and soul and life after death. Buddhism teaches prajna, that is understanding, as against superstition and supernaturalism. It teaches karuna, compassion, love. It teaches samata, equality. That is what man wants for good and happy life on earth. These three principles of Buddhism make their appeal to me. These three principles should also make an appeal to the world. Neither God or soul can save society. So it is very clear that no God, no soul becomes a very important category of understanding the Buddhism itself. And he reads Buddha and excavates the text or read the text or discover many of those things. And he also says that Chaturvarna is not a custom but a religion, and therefore it is very problematic. It needs to be discarded outrightly. Now when this manuscript was written of Buddha and His Dhamma, there are two versions. Let me tell you, there are two versions. One version says, which is by Dr. L.R. Bali, that Baba Sahib had given him an off-print or something of his book. I don't know. I have not seen that. But he says so. There is another narrative account. The other narrative account is that of both Nanak Chand Rattu as well as Ananda Kausalya. Ananda Kausalya several times in Maharashtra, when he delivered lectures, he says that he read the preface, and the preface which was published is not the same preface what he had read. This is very, very clear. But he had no evidence to prove that. Now we have an evidence to prove, because Akash Singh Rathod published the original preface in that anecdoted edition. And that original copy of the preface was with Eleanor Elliot. And how, certain things were tinkered around. And there is a deep politics in it. So I don't want to go into the politics, but Ananda Kausalyan said that it was a typescript which he had seen on the table of Dr. Ambedkar's study room when he died on on 6th December. So exactly on 7th December he visits and he sees that, and Nanak Chand Ratu also mentions. So the manuscript got tied but was not sent for publication, as evident from Nanak Chand Ratu's account as well as Ananda Kausalya's account. The manuscript was also seen by him before his death, because what they what they what they say when Nanak Chand Ratu narrates the story of 6th December, he says that Dr. Ambedkar had asked Nanak Chand Ratu to put the type manuscript of Buddha His Dhamma on his table, and that he wanted to see things properly. I mean, there is always a going through the manuscript, and then he dies, whatever it is, whatever the reasons are. So the manuscript was also seen by him before his death, and the preface was different than what is found today. Now, I already explained you how Ananda Kausalyan made this declaration that the original, what he wrote as an original preface, has not been published, and now we have this evidence. Now let us go into the textual tradition. The life of Buddha is mentioned in the text, mainly the Jatakas, that is Nidan Katha, Mahavastu, Lalita Vistar, and Buddha Charita. Kosambi, Dharmananda Kosambi, explained the reason for the renunciation, and he also wrote a play around it. According to Pradeep Gokhale, Professor Pradeep Gokhale, Ambedkar borrowed that particular narrative from Dharmananda Kosambi's that text. However, I don't agree with it, because Dr. Ambedkar relied more on the Chinese version of Buddha Charita. Similarly, he relied more on the Chinese version of Dhammapada rather than the Sri Lankan version of Dhammapada and the Buddha Charita. So this makes a lot of difference, and there is a big difference between Ashwagosha's Buddha Charita of Chinese version and the Ashwagosha's Buddha Charita of the Sri Lankan version. Thus, first stereotype was broken. For example, he started reading the text not at a face value, but started reading the text in a very different way and tried to understand what could be the historical condition and what could be the historical past through which we can understand this textual tradition. Then the second stereotype was to make distinction between the Vedic, Upanishad, and Kapil, Sankhya, and the existing philosophers of that time. So he makes a comparison between the Vedics, between the Upanishads, between the Brahmanas, and also the Sankhya and the existing philosophers of that time, which he collates through the strong textual tradition. And there is an interesting account in his Buddha His Dhamma, where where Dr. Ambedkar writes the saints, the sages that are mentioned in Rig Veda have some respect for him. That is how he writes that Buddha had a respect for these kind of people. But that respect, if you see, was very limited in nature, and it gets mentioned in the Digha Nikaya, in one of the sutta of Digha Nikaya. Because when you see those names and when you see the suttas in the Rig Veda, they are something like someone emphasizes only on one particular, but somebody emphasizes on air, someone emphasizes on the heat or the vitality, then someone emphasizes on something else. So someone emphasizes only on water. So these are the kind of stray things which those Vedic sages had talked about, and that is how the conception of the Pancha Mahabhuta get constructed in the Upanishad tradition, whereas the concept of Pancha Mahabhuta doesn't exist in the Buddhist tradition. It is all about the four Mahabhutas, the four basic elements. So he breaks this second stereotype that everything is homogeneous. That completely get broken. Then the Ambedkar study of the Buddhist literature is really noteworthy. For all the teachings, he quoted the Nikayas and not any other text. Within the Nikayas, he was careful in quoting the texts such as texts quoting the Sutta Pitaka. And he mostly quoted Anguttara Nikaya, Sayukta Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, and Digha Nikaya. But of all these Nikaya, he quotes Digha Nikaya extensively. Extensively he quotes. And when it comes to the Khudak Nikaya, he is very selective. Khudak Nikaya. Very like he chooses only Sutta Nipat and Dhammapad as a choice in order to disseminate the original Buddha Vachana of the Buddhist practices. Then he did not quote Abhidhamma Pita. This is another important point of departure in his book. The fifth important point of departure was that many times he did not quote the incidents as it is from the Buddhist text and tried to maintain the happenings as historical reality that is away from the dogmas. Say, for example, you have a Mara Vijay, Mahaparinibbana Sutta, then the conversion of the Kashyap brothers. So they are all narrated in a very mystified manner in the textual tradition. So Dr. Ambedkar completely, eliminates that particular narration. Now, say for example, when it comes to Mahaparinibbana Sutta, when you read that Sutta, so there is a dialogue between Indra and Buddha, and Indra says, now it is time for you to come. I'll take you. And Buddha says, no, 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 I will not come. That kind of a dialogue, it exists. This is something quite an interesting one, though it has very poetic kind of a things. But Dr. Ambedkar completely eliminated those things. Similarly, he did not agree that that all those things which are there, like the four things he saw, and therefore he developed vairagya, or he developed that idea of detachment, and therefore he left home. So he completely disagreed with that. And he finds that because there is a question, like, a person who leaves the home at the age of 28, it's just practically not possible for anyone not to see any death, not to see the old women in the house, or old lady, his own grandparents and everything. So things were very much there. Now, that cannot be a reason. So therefore, the conflict between the Shakyas and the Koliyas becomes a very important incident. And then later on, in some of the narratives in the Nikayas, you will notice that someone comes to the Buddha and says, now they have resolved and you can go back. And he says, no, I will not go back. So there were certain practices of the Gana Sanghas, and he had to leave Gana Sanghas. He had to become a Shramana. He had to become a Pravajak in order to save his family, because he was against the resolution of a war. But in order to save the family, he lives. He says, okay, fine, I will leave the Gana Sangha. I don't have any problems. And that is how he becomes Parivrajya. So similarly, the narration of the enlightenment, he leaves home at 28 and he gets enlightened at the age of 33. So quite 5 years he spent, such a long time. So enlightenment is not something which is a magical event. It is rather a discovery of the Pratita Samutpad and the Buddha's resolve that I can answer those questions very well. So you have many of those examples where he completely deviated and he made it a historical happening. Then there is this whole conversion where he mentions various those conversions which Buddha did was from various strata of Indian society. We do have the inscriptional evidences of early historic period where the professions are mentioned, what people were doing mentioned, and they become a donor, they become a monk, which is categorically recorded in their donatory inscription. So the trend really continued. So there is a departure from stereotypes which was evolved due to Oriental scholarship and the Brahmanical interpretation of Buddhism, mainly in the theoretical and practical understanding of the words like Atma, Punarjanma, Karma, Ahimsa, and the qualities of the Dhamma. Like what is soul, what is rebirth, and what is Kamma, and what is Ahimsa. So these are all because the Brahmanical scholarship has always collated everything. Now, just to tell you one small example, you know, he writes that what is a Kusala Dhamma and what is a Kusala Dhamma, and he makes a list. Similarly, he finds that the word Nirvana is basically the Pali word Nibbana, and the Pali word Nibbana means cessation of hate, anger, violence, and desire, whereas that becomes Nirvana, and that is first time found in the Brahmanical text called Gita. So therefore, Gita is a post-Buddhist composition, which is very clear. And uh, uh, and in the Brahmanical practices in or tradition, the Nirvana becomes salvation of soul. So there are this fundamental difference. The other stereotype he broke that the spiritual notion and religious affinity, which was broken by making quotations for social relevance discourses such as the girl better than boy or the husband and a wife and etc. So these are very important things which he narrated in his book, and he quotes from the various sources. Then he also makes it very clear that there are interpolations that happen in the textual tradition, and he completely bypasses those things. Then another stereotype that bhikshu, that is a monk, as a spiritual leader. So he says that monk is not a spiritual leader, but rather it is a social worker. Then he made Buddha and Buddhism relevance to politics and social conditioning. And then there is a description of criticism from the ancient and contemporary point of view, which he makes. Then, interestingly, you will also find that when it comes to Shunyata, he does not mention Nagarjuna. He quotes Dignag. And he understands the problems of Nagarjuna, how the Nagarjuna Shunyata is different, whereas Ambedkar's understanding of Shunyata is very different, which goes to the Nikaya. And the idea of Anatta, which has been beautifully elaborated and elucidated by Pradeep Gokhale, that Ambedkar's understanding of Anatta is close to the Nikaya and not to Nagarjuna. So that makes him completely different. And how there are certain symbolisms that gets employed in the Buddhist tradition. Then he also says that religion is not divine origin. They are all man-made, and not divine origin. Religion is for man, for the humanity. He also says that Buddha denied existence of soul, and he quotes uh, uh, um, Annata Lakan Sutta, then and there are other suttas also he quotes. Then he makes the distinctions of the karma, what is the whole idea of karma, he explains, and completely rejects the Brahmanical explanation of karma and emphasizes that It is what you do is in the present life, and your present life is not governed by your past life or past deed. So what you do today is your karma, and nothing to do with your past as such. He writes that the educated Brahmins know fully well that the Buddhist law of karma is quite different from the Brahmanic law of karma. Yet they keep on saying that Buddhism is the same as Brahmanism and Hinduism. So he maintains that Hindu law of karma is based on soul and hereditary, and there is a transmigration of soul, whereas Buddhist law of karma completely denies and says that the past has no role in defining your karma. It is what you do in the present life. He also maintains that future of an individual depends on his own action of body, speech, and mind. And then he quotes Milinda Panna, another text he quotes. Very, very interesting. Then he says that belief in God, soul, divinity, supernaturalism is a Dhamma. That these are not part of the Dhamma, and constantly mentions that the the Buddha's discourses have been misquoted, and there is this interpolation. And he also points to some of the suttas which are there in the Nikayas. Mainly, also you have the narrative in the Digha Nikaya as well as in the Anguttara Nikaya, where Buddha maintains that the things which are contradictory to my basic principles cannot be taken as my own vachana, my own sayings. So so you have to take note that the things that are contradictory are not said by me. It is the followers of the Buddha, the monks fraternity, who made their own interventions, and the process of compilation of the text becomes very important to understand, and therefore you cannot read the text at a face value. So these are some of the important points. I don't want to go into too much of the details of the text, but I just thought, I will give you a good idea about this text. Then when the book get published in 57, so the Mahabodhi Society Journal, there is this person called Sramananera Jivaka. He wrote a review of the book. Similarly, the Burmese also rejected that book, and even the Japanese also rejected that book. Very interesting. They became very critical of this book. But after 1980 onwards, more specifically, after 1980 onwards, there is a different interest of the Japanese. And the text then gets translated in Japanese, and so far 7 reprints have been made of that Buddha and His Dhamma. So in the Mahabodhi Society Journal, they declared that this is a dangerous book, and it contradicted the theory of karma, ahimsa, that Buddhism was merely a social system. So they contest this particular idea because they were seeing Buddha more from the spiritual point of view, something who is a superhuman being, very spiritual being, and all kinds of things. It also says that Dr. Ambedkar's works explain the hatred and aggressiveness the new Buddhists nourished and displayed. They asked the people to be careful to accept Ambedkar's Buddha as being the word of Buddha. And they declared that it is not Buddha and his Dhamma, but it is Ambedkar and his Dhamma. So very and they also criticize the work for hiding the sources from which sources Dr. Ambedkar had quoted. Then in Rangoon in Burma, it says the great doctor tampered with the text, and wherever he found views in Buddhism inconvenient to his uh, um, own understanding, he considered them as later accretion and made by monks. So, 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 so all these people were seeing the text at a face value. They were reading the text as Shabda Pramanya, whereas Dr. Ambedkar did not read the text as Shabda Pramanya, that means the word as a evidence. So this is how the review came, and they completely rejected. Then the Mahabodhi Society's critique was replied by D.C. Ahir in 1960 and says that reviewer must be impartial and all-sided and balanced. However, no one could really defend that book. Now, what happens in 1956? Dr. Ambedkar was cremated at Mumbai. The dead body flew from Delhi to Nagpur for some time because they were deciding where to cremate him, and they suddenly decided to cremate him in Nagpur. Therefore, the aircraft comes to Nagpur. It remained there for almost 3-4 hours. People came to know, and they just went to Nagpur airport to see the dead body of Dr. Ambedkar. The body was uh, 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 deloaded from the aircraft, and it was kept in a launch in Nagpur, Nagpur airport. And then they decided, no, it will be done in Mumbai. So that is how the dead body goes to Mumbai. And then the cremation happens in Mumbai. So in order to carry people, they started a special train from Nagpur to Dadar, and that train later on became Nagpur Dadar Express, which is renamed as Sevagram Express now. So that is the history of the Sevagram Express. Now, what happens on that part at that cremation? On the cremation, the lot of people had come. I mean, you have photographic evidences and all kinds of things, and on the funeral pyre, because Dr. Ambedkar wanted to hold a big conversion in Mumbai after Nagpur. So people on their own decided to get converted, and it was Ananda Kausalya who conducted that ceremony. And the 22 pledges were recited. Lot of people have criticized 22 pledges. However, nobody has explained what is non-Buddhist in it. Nobody has explained what is non-Buddhist in it. Everything is Buddhist, that I don't believe in soul, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in divinity, which is very much Buddhist. When I was in China and I was having a conversation with one young boy, and I said, are you Buddhist? He said, no, I'm not Buddhist. I said, do you believe in divinity? He said, no. I said, do you believe in destiny? He said, no. I said, do you believe in rebirth of the, do you believe in rebirth? He said, no. I said, do you believe in the this transmigration of the soul? He said, no. I said, do you believe in equality? He said, yes. I said, do you believe in fraternity? He said, yes. Do you believe in liberty? He said, yes. I said, do you believe that your life is you believe in destiny? He said, no. I said, do you believe in humanity? He said, yes. I said, do you believe in love, compassion? He said, yes. Then I said, you are Buddhist. And he said, no, no, I'm not Buddhist. I said, why? No, 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 no. My parents are Buddhist. They go to Buddha temple, but I'm not Buddhist. I said, when did Buddha say that you have to go to the Buddha temple? Or I ask this question to many people. When did Buddha say that you have to chant Buddham Saranam Gacchami? Nothing of that sort. Because the text, none of the textual, the discourse, whatever discourse you read, Buddha never said first you have to chant Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. It is the followers of the monk, the followers who have made this compilation, and they were the one who were making these kind of a poetic compositions. And later on, they become, I mean, if you see the Nikayas, you will notice number of such verses that become part of the Khuddaka Patha, which is a separate text. So Ananda Kausalyan recited, and then when he got the book, so he was traveling from Mumbai to Sri Lanka. So he took that book, boarded the train, because that train was called Madras Mail, which is known as Chennai Mail now. And it is one train which I still would say that fantastic example of how the post-independent India is diligently running the British Indian Railway. Why I say so? If you see the distance between Chennai and Mumbai, it is just maybe some 1,300 or 1,500 kilometers. And for that distance, that train is, I mean, it takes 36 hours. Can you imagine? 36 hours. No train takes that much of, no mail train rather takes that much of time. So this train leaves in the night. So Ananda Kausalyan sits in that train, gets up in the morning, starts reading the book. And by the time he reaches Sri Lanka, because from Chennai, he boards a ship and goes to Sri Lanka. So sorry, from Chennai, he goes to Rameshwaram, and from there he goes to Sri Lanka. That is the journey he takes. And by that time, he completely read that book. And then he started translating that book in Hindi. So in the Hindi version, he translated as Buddha or Unka Dharma, which is later criticized by people in Nagpur. And then the title was changed that Buddha and his Dhamma. However, what is important was that he was the only one who defended that. And when he made translation of that book, I mean, he gave couple of lectures in Sri Lanka and Burma. And there he defended that book. And he gave the sources of that from where all these sources came. And he did not really cross-examine. These are these things, these are these things. No, not that kind of a things was not done. It by sheer memory, because he told in the house of my mama, my maternal uncle, that how he translated that book and how it came, how he quoted those sources when he was alive. So, uh, uh, he simply through memory he quoted. It is this, it is that, it is this sutta, it is that sutta, that kind of a things. So it took for a long time people to understand from where Dr. Ambedkar quoted those sources. And then what happened in the late 20th century and the early 21st century is that some of the scholars, especially Western scholars, started looking at Ambedkar very differently and started also looking at Buddhism very differently. So people like Hancock, Christopher Queen, and a lot of these people, they saw Buddhism and Ambedkar's interpretation of Buddhism from the point of view of untouchability. And that how the depressed community can understand, and it is for them. So the so-called liberation theology and the understanding was completely different by these people, whereas people like Eleanor Eliot and Gail Womet had completely different understanding. Gail Womet says that it is very radical. Ambedkar's understanding of Buddhism and interpretation of Buddhism is very radical. He made Buddha as a very radical figure. The same thing echoes in the remarks of Dalai Lama. When you ask Dalai Lama about Ambedkar and his Buddhism, he says, oh, he's too radical. That is how he says. It's too radical. So there are these people who made that text as a not as a part of intellectual understanding, but a very different kind of an understanding that it is exclusively for this kind of communities and it is this kind of a community kind of an interpretation. So these are the tremendous problem with the Westerners who also would not like to give up their attitude. It is all the attitude. It is sad that, they claim that they are very postmodernist kind of a things. But at the end of it, you will notice that they go on legitimizing their own presuppositions. And this is also the case with the Indians. They go on legitimizing their presuppositions. The Buddhist philosophy was the first philosophy in the world who rejected presuppositions. And it is the postmodernist philosophy which rejected the presupposition. So you can see the interface between the two philosophical traditions. And irrespective of that, the claim postmodernist in India, as well as in the European and American academia, their claim becomes very dubious because they go on re-legitimizing their own presuppositions. And whether it is Christopher Queen, whether it is anyone for that matter, they are a friend, whether it is Hancock or Belvinker and even Hans Belz also makes the similar kind of a similar kind of a things. And all these people, there are number of researchers who come from America, and they would like to study the neo Buddhist community, the one which are bad examples and not the good examples. So you always study the unrighteous examples and then claim that nothing has changed, which is completely wrong. So the other person who got engaged with Dr. Ambedkar's Buddha and His Dhamma was Rao Sahib Kasbe. And Rao Sahib Kasbe delivered series of lectures in Marathi, and he also wrote in like how there are interfaces between Ambedkar and Buddha, and Ambedkar and Marx, and how Baba Sahib goes near Mars, how Baba Sahib goes to Buddha. I mean, this is a fantastic comparison he made. However, our leftist intellectuals in India completely bypassed all those things. And the debate between Ambedkarism and the leftism, which you witness these days in Northern India and Gangetic Valley, I find it very strange, because we witnessed these debates when we were in our high school. So we have been part of that debate tradition in Marathi. And at the same time, let me also inform you that the so-called left in India, I always say to my left friends, I have absolutely no problem with the class struggle at all. But the rise of class struggle in India has always resulted in the rise of process of Sanskritization. How you're going to stop it? The leftist, the socialist, including that of the so-called liberal, do not have answer to this particular question. And therefore, you will notice that the politics in India is still governed by the Vedantic logic, whether it is Gandhi, whether it is even so-called the present day Gandhi. It's all Vedantic. And you will observe that Pradeep Gokhale's intervention becomes very important in this regard. So there is a recent book he published, Dharmate Dhamma, which is in Marathi, which is a fantastic book. And there he explained Ambedkar's Karma Siddhanta, Punarjanma Siddhanta, that he reinterpreted. And according to him, the way Buddhism was reinterpreted by various sects or various things, whether it is Vaibhashika, whether it is Madhyamika, whether it is Yogachara, whether it is Sautantric. So in a similar way, the Navayana Buddhism the Buddhism gets reinterpreted as Navayana Buddhism. Then he also explains the Kasbe's argument, Rao Sahib Kasbe's argument, and his own understanding of how it is intellectual, how it is scientific, and in all those things. So that is one part, and then there is another thing which I think I should also talk about, this whole idea of this Navayana term, because asked by by uh, by one of the journalists, and he says that, well, you may call it as Navayana. That is what he said. But interestingly, there is a book by Elam, which was published in sometime in 1930, which is called Navayana and Modern Buddhism. And this was brought to my notice uh, by one research scholar uh, in Tata Institute of Social Science. His name is what's his name? Some Akshay. I think Akshay or Akshay. I think Akshay. Akshay Gurjar. He was, just tell me. I'll just. Yeah, Akshay Gurjar. He was a research scholar in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. When I went in 2023, he told me a very interesting narration. He found this. I mean, it was his friend Yuvraj who brought some. Uh, uh, who told him about this particular book, and then he explored that particular book. So he found that book in the library of Siddharth College, and that book came from Dr. Ambedkar's collection. So this term Navayana was, Dr. Ambedkar was very well aware of this term Navayana, and the title of the book was Navayana Buddhism and Modern Thought, which was written by J. Elam in 1930. So, though he derived this title, but his interpretations and understanding was quite different. Elam had its own limitations, and Dr. Ambedkar became very limitless. And this is how he expands. And then there is this very interesting, incident I would like to narrate, and then I close down. I was in China, so I gave this book to Professor Yu Lung Yu, and he read that book. And he read the Hindi translation of Ananda Kausal, and he was impressed because he was very comfortable reading Hindi. And then he decided to translate that book in China. It went under eight or eight repeats, 7 or 8 repeats. Now it has gone much ahead. So so there is a competition between China and Japan as usual. And he said we will translate this book, and the translation process is going on. He told me that China has all the Buddhist sutras. And this particular book he sees as a modern sutra of Buddhism from India. And therefore, we must translate this sutra in Chinese. That was his defense, that was his idea. So quite an interesting one, how, and China is one country where you have a lot of translations available. I think I think they are, I must say that, they are very good at translations, and they have a long tradition of translation which no other country has. Now I close by quoting one important thing, that how you observe the importance of Buddha and His Dhamma. There is a book recently published that on Navayana Buddhism by Shailesh Darokar, Bodhi SR, and Vasting. And they consider Buddha and his Dhamma as a methodology. What is that? It says first, as a religion, he placed morality at its center in place of God and soul. As a belief system, he asserted, he assessed that Nibbana and Buddhisti, breaking down social barriers, and Maitri as critical to the path shown by Buddha. Fourth, he says, as a political theory, he produced the concept of Prabuddha Bharat, enlightened India. Fifth, as a history, he noted the need to be cautious while consuming traditional narratives without putting such narrative to the test of reason and welfare for all. And sixth, as a social theory, brought back social into Buddhism. Then, as a knowledge system, he argued for historical deconstruction and rational reconstruction of social episteme. And eighth, as a philosophy, he revived as a procedural, contextual, experiential, and rational philosophical tradition. And it is in this context, I would like to say that Ambedkar wrote in Annihilation of Caste that nothing is permanent, everything is changing. And in 55 lecture, he says, nothing is permanent, everything is changing, being is becoming. So this is a very important philosophical interventions Dr. Ambedkar makes. Today we understand being is becoming through Deleuze. It has its own problems because Deleuze does not explain the role of consciousness, whereas Dr. Ambedkar very meticulously emphasizes pradnya as a part of consciousness of the righteous kind. And that is precisely the reason if the objective of rationality or pradnya, knowledge production, is to ward off the ignorances, it becomes the righteous rationality, it becomes the righteous knowledge production. And if the objective of the rationality is to ward off ignorances and maintain hegemony, it becomes unrighteous pradnya, knowledge. And therefore, it becomes protected ignorance. So the pradnya becomes very important. And to kill your belief systems, to kill your presuppositions, the knowledge becomes very important means. And Dr. Ambedkar always emphasized on this rational knowledge traditions, which was being produced all over the world. And he always embraced those traditions in his writings and presented them to the public and to larger masses. And I must say that there is a gross misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and propagation of what Dr. Ambedkar wrote, and the ways the academia has viewed Dr. Ambedkar. I mean, I'm sorry to say, the Indian academic system and the Indian academia are all Vedantic. The politics in India, I see as Ambedkar, anti-Ambedkar. Ambedkar represents transformation, whereas anti-Ambedkar are the status quos who do not wish to make any kind of a transformation. I'm not talking about the political parties. I'm talking about the politics in its purity, as a part of the consciousness. And the consciousness in India is that of the consciousness of senselessness. And that is the reason we have society governed by the protected ignorances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
I hope I have not exceeded the time.
You have not exceeded the time. We have half an hour for questions.
Okay.
So far, we don't have questions. We just have one comment, which is from Dr. Inder Singh, saying, excellent and kudos. Asian psychologists only started working on Buddha and Buddhist psychology much later when they saw Europeans work, maybe treating Buddha as a god of worship. And we've got Dr. Alone raising his hand. Please come in, Dr. Alone. You just got to unmute yourself, please. Not very well. I'm trying to say something, but I can't hear you. Okay, yes.
It was a really very good lecture. It is the first time that I have come across such kind of explanation about Buddha and his Dhamma of Ambedkar. Um, uh, my there are 2-3 question, not 2-3, but okay. Let me just go to the one last portion of your talk, where you talk about the Buddha's this Buddham Sharanam Gacchami and this all that, right?
Mm.
So whatever my question is, what then how do we define this Buddha Vandana? What we do is a practice of some certain kind of cultural practices, or can we say this whatever the interpretation of the Buddha, what his philosophy or whatever? That's my question.
Well, the monks created that. The followers of the Buddha created that, and the chanting is not. I mean, if you see the meaning of the chanting, that I go under the refuge of Buddha, that does not mean that I consider Buddha as a divine being. Similarly, I go under the refuge. I go to the refuge of the Dhamma. So Dhamma is all morality, and the Sangha is a group of people. I mean, the monks, there is so these are the chants which are developed, which have grown out of respect and out of reverence,
Okay.
and does not go beyond that. However, it is also a resolve for everyone, those who chant, that it is a resolve that we will follow the Dhamma, and Dhamma is all about the morality and ethicality. So for Ambedkar, the idea of Dhamma is quite different. It is not a ritual, but it is practicing the moral life and try to be righteous one in the life. The other element is that the cultural aspect of it. So everything, I mean, it becomes part of the culture, but that culture is not something that you chant for, that the way you chant other in other religious practices. If I do this, you give me this, you give me that, all those boons and demand from the god, that kind of a thing does not exist in the Buddha Vandana. And say, for example, most of the time you will notice that there are these kind of verses. एवं मे सुतं एक समय भगवा साविचित्त विहरति जेतवने अनाथ पिंडिकसम आरामे तकोयंतरा देवता अभिकंतायं नृत्य अभिकंतवना केवल कंपजेतन उबासेत्वा एन भगवा एन पुस्तकम मित्वा एक so Bhagavanta Gataya Majjabhasi and all those things. So it clearly narrates that how Buddha was residing at Shravasti and then gave this pravachan, gave this discourse. So that makes the discourses as a part of historical reality rather than making it something like a divine being.
Okay.
So the aspect of divinity is completely gets bypassed. And Khudak part is a collection of those verses which exist in the Nikaya itself, that becomes part of the chanting practices. And every culture, every religion, every these things, they have their own chanting practices. The Buddhist chanting practices are also there. I don't know, people generally don't listen to those chants in India. But when you go outside, the Japanese have their own chanting practices, the Chinese have their own, the Sri Lankans they have own, the Thai have their own. So there is a chanting festival which is organized at Bodh Gaya by Government of India. And it's a very interesting festival. So you just go and listen to those chants, very completely different. And it gives you different ambience also. The way the chanting traditions are there, at least I know there are those recitations in the Brahmanical practices, mainly the Vedic chants and all those things. Then similarly, you have the Christian these things recitation. So likewise, there are Buddhist recitations, but all the Buddha Vandana, the Buddhist recitations is not all about praying to divinity, but rather resolving to follow the Dhamma which has been told by Buddha.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Inder Singh, Dr. Saab, if you'd like to ask the question yourself, that's fine. Otherwise, I can read it out for you.
Uh,
Okay.
I just want to know, that just came to my mind, that whether Buddha has three chairs, that is Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, have some similarity with the Dr. Ambedkar's uh, three commandments, that is educate, agitate, and organize.
Not really. Not really, because the context is completely different. And Dr. Ambedkar is making the Buddhist practices, I mean, the very idea of Buddhism is very political and to build the republic. That is how Ambedkar sees that. So the you know the though the Sangha in the Buddhist parlance, I mean, he did not consider them as spiritual leaders. He considered them as a social servants. And it is their job to help people to remove uh, the sorrow of people. The very idea of organize, uh, uh, like you agitate and organize. So though it has echo, I mean, it is almost like you work like a Buddhist Sangha, and but it is not in the traditional sense of the term, but rather more to do with the present day political democracy and the constitutional beings. So these are something which are quite different, though there are certain similarities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other question?
I presume people will come back in the next class once they've thought about this a little bit more and ask
Okay.
questions then.
Next class is going to be art. So it's all about art, contemporary art practices.
I know,
Right.
but maybe we'll start with, sorry, somebody was saying something?
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Hello, sir. It was it was very very grateful to hear your talk. I just want to ask. You talked about the scriptural, textual evidences that Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar derived their understanding of Buddhism. Are there any works related to other set of source, which is archaeological source, which started to come to the front during the colonial period about Buddhism, and then later on, through the works of Dr. Alexander Cunningham and John Marshall and other archaeologists?
There are a number of works written on the basis of the archaeological evidences. Also, there are works which are related. See, the Shanza's text has been used to rediscover the Buddhist sites, and it was also a beginning of Indian archaeology by Alexander Cunningham. And then later on, you will observe that excavations took place and the understanding of Buddhism also changed over a period of time. It did not just confine to the text, but also the hardcore archaeological evidences. However, I must say that because of the paucity of the text and certain informations, you cannot rebuild the entire history of Buddhism.
Right.
And there are constraints. Say, for example, when Taranath wrote History of Buddhism in 16th century, 16th or 17th century, so 17th century. So he relied on the available sources which were there in his monastic establishments. But lot of the sources had already destroyed. And therefore, to reconstruct the history of Buddhism becomes very problematic. You can't, there are lacuna of evidences. And people have written on the basis of the archaeological evidences. Now, what
Right.
happens here also? as when it comes to the later history of Buddhism, mainly the post Ashokan or the post Second Council history of Buddhism, we do not have many sources to study that. And uh, uh, there are inscription evidences which talks about the sects and all those things. But the sects also get mentioned in the Abhidhamma Pitak, that is in the Kathavattu. Kathavattu is one text which talks about certain sects. So you can see the process of compilation of the text, and you can mark that date very clearly.
Right.
Say, for example, texts like such as Sutta Nippa, some of the verses are also found mentioned in the Ashokan inscriptions. The
Mm.
Sutta.
Right.
So likewise, you can understand that how the text gets compiled over a period of time. And then there are those archaeological evidences also. Similarly, the non-Buddhist worshipping practices are mentioned in the Chulla Niddesa. And let me also tell you that the Chulla Niddesa is almost like an explanatory text to Sutta Nipata. So one has to study that those dimensions very clearly. Nobody has studied it. Then at the same time, we have the issue of language. Say, for example, the Karika language, the Dharani Sutra, and all other Buddhist texts. They are written, composed in a very different way. The language changes. It does not remain, static.
Mm.
So you have to understand even the nomenclature of hybrid Sanskrit becomes extremely problematic. Or even for that matter to say that when we try to read the 4th, 5th century CE inscriptions, we always say that it is all in Sanskrit. I don't think Ajanta inscription is in Sanskrit, the 5th century Vakataka inscription. Because the word like Janimana is not a Sanskrit word. And those kind of words are found mentioned in the text. So the structure of the language becomes very important. And we do have the textual evidences which says that number of grammars were being taught at Nalanda, such as Panini Vyakaran, Gaumi Vyakaran, Chand Vyakaran, Saraswat Vyakaran. So there are a number of these Vyakaranas that were taught. So we don't know what is the structure of the language, and people who are interested in study of the language have not taken pain to understand the grammar of this Karika language and the Dharani Sutras and the later textual tradition. Though scholars understand texts like Pramanavartikam, Nyaya Bindu, and all these texts through the Paninian grammar, but actually speaking, the text is not composed in a typified Paninian grammarian way. And then, as far as Panini is concerned, there is a claim. There is a Buddhist claim, there is a Brahmanical claim. The Brahmanical camp says that Panini was a Brahmin, and no doubt he was a Brahmin, and that he was a grammarian. However, there are other evidences. Shanza, when he travels in India, he found the stupa of Panini in Gandhara. And he talks about, and then the Tibetan sources talk about the debate between the Chandragaumi and the Panini. So the Gaumi Vyakaran, already we have the Gaumi Vyakaran. We don't have a text which belongs to Chandragaumi. We have only one text which is preserved in Bhandarkar Oriental Institute, and nobody has studied that particular text. So quite likely that there might have been a debate between Chandragaumi and Panini, and that is how the stupa of Panini exists in the Gandhara. So that clearly shows that he might have converted to Buddhism.
Right.
That possibility is very much there because there is a stupa. Similarly, when it comes to the textual tradition, I just give you one small example. There is in Shanda's record, the so-called, in India he's known as Huensang, but in Chinese he is a Shanza. So in his travel record, at certain places, he mentions the stupa of heroes, the Bodhisattva heroes of the Jatakas. He mentions, but we don't get any, evidence, the visible evidence, because there are problems. However, there is an interesting part. In cave number 10 Ajanta painting, there is a narrative of Shaddanta Jataka. And that Shaddant, and at the end of the narrative, you will notice that the queen, the queens and other people are going to the Chaityagraha. Why that particular unit came? The answer you will find in Shanza's record, because Shanza mentions that the stupa of Shaddanta was there in Sarnath. So Danta Uchchedana Stupa. That is what he mentions.
Right.
And the and so he also mentions that some of the stupas were built by Ashoka. So by 3rd century BC, already this tradition had come to honor the Bodhisattva heroes of the Jataka with the stupas, and therefore you have this particular representation in Ajanta cave number 10. Whereas in cave number 16 painting of Shaddanta Jatak Ajanta, it is completely different because it follows the narrative in the Haribhatta Jatak. There are, I mean, you do have the different Jataka texts which were composed later, like Haribhatta Jatak Mala, then you have Aryasur Jatak Mala, then you have Gopada Jatak Mala, and there is one more. And then there are a couple of those Jataka stories get mentioned in some of the sutras of the sutra text which are there in China. Sutra Lankar and all those things. So these one has to see very carefully, and there will the not every time you will get the archaeological evidence, and not every time you will get the textual evidence.
Right. All right. Thank you, sir.
Amitava, would you like to come in now?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you, sir, for such a illuminating discussion and lecture, sir. I am eager to know that if Dr. Ambedkar has used these narratives tradition, visual narratives from Ajanta paintings or other sites, sculptures or painting narratives, how did he see them? Did he see them with any kind of historical value, or how did he use them for his argument?
No, he did not. He did not use the visual tradition for his argument at all, because his concerns were very different. And but there is an interesting account by Shastri. Baba Saab ke Sangat mein something it is written in Hindi.
Okay.
And there he mentions that they had gone to see the exhibition of the Buddhist sculptures, which was exhibited in the civil hall, some civil hall in Delhi. So they were all Kushan sculptures and all, lot of sculptures which are related with Buddha. And Dr. Ambedkar, I mean, he had already seen the exhibition, and he said that every period, everywhere, the artists with their own imagination have conceptualized the image of Buddha. And at the same time, he also says that I'm not averse. I mean, there is nothing in it's not a crime or anything, or it is not something unusual.
Yes, yes.
That the religious imageries have come up in India. So he says that it is everywhere in the world, and it is a very natural phenomenon. But it matters a lot how you make how you make use of them for the interpretation and understanding of the later Buddhism. Say, for example, I just tell you a small example. There is a Ratan Sutta in Sutta Nipata. And it talks about the various Ratna, that is jewels of Buddha. And in that it mentions the Sinha Ratna, Hasti Ratna, the Grahapati Ratna, the Stri Ratna, all kinds of these 7 Ratnas it mentions. And you will find the representation of these in the early historical monuments.
Yes, yes.
Which is very much symbolic in nature. So you do have the representation of those things. So it matters how you understand. And then also you have to, you also need, when you excavate the whole idea of emergence of Buddha image and all, so you need to see the, say, uh, the narration in the Milinda Panno, the narration which exists in the Nikaya. Then at the same time, when we talk about the construction of the stupa, we often only take into account the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. But the Udana, there is one story of Bahila. So he was killed by a buffalo, by a bull, and Buddha comes to know, and so he was a monk, and Buddha says, no, you should cremate him and construct a stupa in his honor. So the construction of the stupa was very much part of the Shraman tradition, and was an ongoing tradition which gets adapted in Buddhism. So during the lifetime of Buddha, it said the stupas were constructed. So this is a very good textual record, and generally we only attribute to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and then that is why we see the rise of the stupas all over in Buddhist monasteries. That's not correct. So the tradition was very much existing. And when you read Shaunza's account, you will notice that the stupas get added by someone or by Ashoka and all those things. So there is always this addition that goes on.
Yes,
And you have the differences, like you have the votive stupas and the memorial stupas. So both things are there. So it matters like how you make use and understand these things.
yes. Thank you.
Piyush?
Okay.
Yeah, Piyush
Hi.
had raised.
Thank you, sir, for the amazing lecture. This was you used the term Shabda Pramana, and you saying that Ambedkar did not read the text through Shabda Pramana. I
Go
just
by the
wanted
Shabda
to,
Pramana.
so I wanted to request to just elaborate on what is Shabda Pramana, and it is different from Anuman, obviously, but how, because it both include kind of textuality, and it's also a bit confusing because if you read anything, there is an act of interpretation involved. So how does, even in the Vedantic tradition, like how did they frame Shabda Pramana apart from it being something of an authority from a learned person? Yeah.
Well,
That's my question.
first thing is that, as I said, that Ambedkar did not read the text at a face value.
Yeah.
There is a complete denial of reading the text at a face value, meaning that the word, whatever is written in the text, is a reality, or you have to believe whatever is written in the text. That logic is completely rejected by Dr. Ambedkar. That is one part. The second part is that the idea of word as a evidence, that Shabda Pramanya, is rejected in the Buddhist philosophy, and therefore you have a debate between the Buddhist and the Nyaya Vaisheshika camp. None of the text prove that the Nyaya Vaisheshikas could win over the Buddhist. However, the Buddhists admit, mainly by the Dignak Dharmakirti and the other person that follows after Dharmakirti, not remembering his name, they admit word as an evidence only in a limited way, not in its entirety. So you do have a difference between their understanding. So that is how one has to read the Shabda Pramanya. And the like whatever is said is correct, that cannot be true. So just because it is written in the world, that does not mean that it is true. Say, for example, when Buddha himself narrates in Digha and also one of the other texts, where he says that not that everything I'm saying is correct, not that everything I'm saying is true. I'm saying is, I mean, you have to judge if it is contradictory to my basic tenets. So that itself shows that how Buddha was rejecting that kind of a Shabda Pramanya.
Okay, so what is the, sorry, just a quick
Is that
follow-up
okay,
question.
Piyush?
Can I ask a quick,
Yeah.
a very small, so what is the value of word in the process of making inference or anumana, which I suppose is one of the pramanas allowed in the Buddhist system? Like, what is the value of word or language in the pramana
The,
system,
the
apart from the
the
pratyaksha.
value of the word or the language, the
Yeah.
it generates certain meaning. Okay. And as
Okay.
per Dharma Kirti, I'm putting Dharma Kirti. I mean, say, I'm just giving you modern example. Derrida says that there is no fixity of meaning. I, am I audible?
Yeah, there was a
Hello?
slight glitch, but you are audible.
Hello?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So
To me, you are.
yeah. So Derrida says that there is no fixity of meaning, okay, of the signifier.
Hmm.
However, when you read Dharma Kirti, you notice that he makes it very clear that the the uh, the lakshana, the characteristics, or the signifier, the meaning of the signifier depends on the uh, on the subjective position. So you have to understand the subjective position. See, Derrida doesn't go into the subjective position of the signifier, but the Buddhist logician like Dharmakirti goes into the subjective position of the signifier. And that is where you will notice that how signifier becomes an important means of understanding. But that understanding, one is like you have a very imaginative way of writing, say Alankar and all those things. The way Ashwaghosh wrote his poetry. And when Ashwaghosh writes his uh, uh, Saundaryanand, he makes it very clear, I'm writing this, but my purpose is this. What you want to is not really it matters to you, but my purpose is this one. So he explains the purpose. So this purposiveness, and that is what the whole idea of hetu pramana, that becomes very important. And 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 that is why the signifier becomes a very important means to understand it. The Just because something is written in the word that the God exists, that there is an analysis of all those things. So, so did not believe in it.
Voice
Doesn't
is
exist.
cracking
There is a
up.
Dasha Akatani, which is mentioned in one of the texts. I don't. There is Dasha Akataniya Sutra. So there are these 10 things which Buddha did not answer. I mean, according to him, going into this kind of question is not for the welfare of the human being. It does not does not help to solve the problems. So the sorrow is always considered as a problem, and then you have to ward up the sorrow. So the wording of the sorrow means bringing happiness. So Buddhism is more like bringing happiness and not the nihilistic kind of a religious practice. The way it was projected during that time, and therefore he says it very clearly. The Marxism also talks about problems, poverty, issues, and all those things. On that count, Marxism does not become nihilistic. So, likewise, he also says that Buddhism is not a nihilistic uh, religious practice. And that is how he understands that the idea of Dhamma as a morality and ethicality. So that is how he defines, and not in the ritualistic terms. So the ritualistic terms which are there, which is disseminated, which is understood through signification process of the signifier. Now, the similar signifiers does not exist in the Buddhist practices. That is what the Ambedkar's argument is. If the later tradition makes it, it is not Buddha's fault. It is the fault of those people. And therefore, he says that the monks are also equally responsible for the decline of Buddhism. That is what his observations. And at the same time, on 16th October 1950, 14th October 1956 and 16th October 1956, he makes it very clear that, I mean, he sees the problem with the Sri Lankan Buddhism as well as the Burmese Buddhism. And he never wanted to make Buddhism as a ritualistic religious practice, like tying a thread or doing this and that. So he did not subscribe to those kind of practices. It's as simple as this. And therefore, how do you understand this whole idea of Shabda Pramana? It really matters a lot.
Okay, thank you, sir. I mean, I'll
Okay.
come with more questions later on in life, but thank you. Yeah.
So there are questions. Okay, yeah, Surya is asking a question. Surya,
Uh,
come on.
Yeah.
Yes. So the way the previous person asked the question is somewhat similar to me. And now, after listening to your answer, I have an added question where you mentioned that like you have to understand a text, you have to first go through the basic tenet of that text and then relate whatever the text is with it. So शब्द पर प्रमाणा आप face value पे नहीं लेंगे. You will first see through the basic tenets, identify the basic tenets, and then work on it. So how does
Yeah.
Baba Sahib does that for Buddha and Buddhism? And over that, is there also this, if we have to identify the subjective position of Baba Sahib, should we go with emancipation of Dalit community as a whole, or emancipation of Hindu, like Indian social order as a whole?
When he makes a critique of Chaturvarna, he makes it very clear that it is not a custom, but it is a religious practice, and therefore it needs to be discarded. So that is just one aspect. The second aspect is that all other people have always talked about emancipation, but the emancipation of only of the untouchable communities. However, it is not true. There are a lot of people which are not untouchable communities are getting converted to Buddhism. And Ambedkar's interpretation of Buddhism is not getting addressed exclusively to the Dalit communities, but to every community in India and also in the world. So he is narrating the Buddha, not, I mean, as a Margadata and not Mokshadata. And that is very, very, very well emphasized throughout his writings. And the stereotypes that have been that emerge in the colonial India about Buddhism and understanding of Buddhism. So these he did not go with these kind of stereotypes. He rejected those stereotypes. So therefore, you should also have a capacity to reject what is said in the text all the time. So you have to examine in a meaningful manner, as I explain you, like when you read Mahaparinibbana Sutta, there is a dialogue between Indra and Buddha. So Dr. Ambedkar did not replicate those kind of dialogues in his text. Or the conversion of the Kashyapa brothers. I mean, it is so much mythical, very much mythical. I mean, full of myths and all those things. Similarly, the narration of the Muchalinda. So he does not mythify that. There are certain things which exist in Dr. Ambedkar's text, no doubt about that. But he quoted the text as it is because he was very much knowing that how people would lament on him or how people would criticize him. And that exactly happened, that the Mahabodhi Society said that it is not Buddha and his Dhamma, but it is Ambedkar and his Dhamma. So therefore, in order to ward off this criticism, he retained some of those things as it is in from the textual tradition. But by and large, when you go through the social aspect as a religion, as a belief system, as a practice, then as a political theory, then as a history, then as a social history, and also the knowledge system and and philosophy, you will notice that there is a considerable degree of difference, and he departed from the traditional understanding of Buddhism and gave a very different understanding, build a very different understanding of Buddhism. So does it satisfy, or you want to ask on this again?
No, sir.
Huh.
For now, I am here.
I'm sorry, I'm not going into too much of the details of the examples, because then it becomes a totally different lecture. I mean,
Nitya?
you can examine even why Dr. Ambedkar emphasizes certain suttas, certain text, and not all the text, because the Tripitaka is a huge body of text, and when he writes the the rules for the bhikshus, the rules for the bhikshunis, and all, actually it derives from the Vinay Pitaka. I mean, this is nothing new, and therefore, in the preface, he claims that I claim no originality. This is just an assemblage. It is just the assembly, he says, which I am creating. And he also writes in Buddha and His Dhamma that the followers of the founder made the conditions so stringent for its own founder. This is what Dr. Ambedkar observes. I just give you a small example how it justifies. When you read Buddha Vamsa, there is a narration that, oh, I want to become a Buddha, and he says, no, you cannot become a Buddha. Previously, there were so many Buddhas, and they became like this, like that, like that, and then you become a Buddha. Then similarly, you have this kind of a like in your life, you have to do these paramitas, and then you become a Buddha, and this kind of thing. So these are all the stringent conditions which the followers made for its own founder. And another example I tell you is that the historicity of the Buddha, the Buddha is a historical persona that is constantly maintained throughout all the Buddhist textual traditions. All the Buddhist textual traditions. It's a different matter. Say, for example, the uh, the Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta. So in the Dhammachakra Pravartan Sutta, the way it is narrated in the Pali textual tradition, mainly coming from Vinay Pitak and then to some other Nikaya. And then later on in the Sutra text, you will notice that there is also an addition of characters. Oh, it is not just the Panchavagya Bhikkhu, but others also witness. So who are those others? So there is a concept of the Maitreya Buddha, there's a Avalokiteshvara, then Tara, then Manjushri, and all these people. I mean, they witness this Dhammachakra Pravartan. So it is not a historical reality. It is a fiction. It is an imagination that goes, and in order to legitimize the whole idea of the bodhisattva images in the Buddhist practices, and all these bodhisattva images, they have certain purpose, certain kind of a not the power, but certain kind of a ideas, and mostly its genesis goes in the Dharani Sutras, and these are all the mental things which gets personified through in the image tradition. Whereas and then when you read the Tibetan traditions, you will notice that there is certain historicization. Say, for example, in the Anguttara Nikaya and in the Sanyukta Nikaya, you do have the mentioning of arhats who were close to Buddha, or the people who were close to Buddha, and you do find the depiction of those people, those 16 or 25 or 32, those kind of historical personas that are mentioned in those texts, and they get historicized through the Tanka painting tradition in Nepal and Tibet. So that's how the tradition is. And also the whole idea of Upaya Kaushala, which is greatly emphasized in Nepal, it is very much a later practice. It is not the original Buddhist kind of the see, there is an interesting this things observation by, or rather a criteria which Ananda Kausalyan has put in his book called Darshan Ved se Marx, that is a darshan, that is philosophy from Vedas to Marx. And there he mentions that he puts the 4 criteria. He says that no Buddhist sect believes in the soul and the rebirth of soul. No Buddhist sect can believe in Punarjanma. No Buddhist sect can merely believe in the reading of the text as a practice, and no Buddhist sect can deny the theory of Pratyuta Samutpada. So these are the 4 conditions Kausalyan puts and says that any Buddhist sect will follow this, whether it is this or that. And if it doesn't follow, then it cannot be Buddhist. That's a very simple conclusion he makes. I mean, it is not liked by many, let me tell you, because Ananda Kausalyan was a very different person. And he also did not read the text at a face value. So like Dr. Ambedkar, he also did not read the text at face value. And not that Dr. Ambedkar also agreed everything what Sanskritayan wrote, or what even Bhikshu Jagdish Kashyap had wrote. I mean, they basically made translations. It is Sanskritayan who makes an interpretative kind of analysis. But there is a difference of understanding even between Sanskritayan and Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar becomes more rational when it comes to the interpretation and understanding of certain conceptual frameworks. That is why Buddha and his Dhamma becomes a great text. So it's all reinterpretation. The way Pradeep Gokhale observes that there is a reinterpretation by the Sautantrik, Madhyamikas, and all other Buddhist philosophical traditions. So likewise, the Navayana or Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma is a reinterpretation of the Buddhism.
Nitya, do you want to come in
Yeah.
next?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Can we say that bhikshus were the earliest or one of the earliest class of social servants, or what the role does they play in social matters?
According to Dr. Ambedkar, the Buddhist monks have the social responsibility. They are not created as spiritual leaders, or spiritual teachers, but as a social servant. And you will notice that when you read certain passages in the Nikaya, you will also observe that the monks are going to the people and serving them, helping them in many matters, number of matters. It's not just one particular thing, but number of matters. And also say for example the role of Navakammika, which is explained in the Vinay Pitak, that the person wants to build a monastery and donate the person, and therefore he cannot make it because he comes from a deprived section, and the word Dalitasya gets mentioned in the Vinay Pitak. So and then the Buddha instructs that no, he needs some help and needs also the technological help, and therefore he appoints someone from the Buddhist Sangha to help him. So there were people who were experts in their respective areas. So the Buddhist text talks about the sippis. There are a number of sippis. Sippis are more like a shilpi, which is a profession, which is an expertise. And there are a number of those characters that are the categories that are mentioned in the Buddhist text. Similarly, when it comes to the Milinda Panno, there is an explanation of Dhamma Nagari. And the Dhamma Nagari will consist of so many people. So the kind architect, this, that, and all kinds of people. So that is how you have to understand. So in all, it is not just the spiritual one, but more a social who will help in warding of the sorrows in the public, in the society. Today, the 20th century has converted into that kind of a spirituality and all. People go for, I mean, I'm nothing against the meditation. You can do if you want to do meditation. If it helps you, it's fine. But for me, I mean, by doing meditation, you are not going to solve the people's problem, people's sorrow. By meditation, you cannot increase the productivity. By meditation, you cannot earn more money. You have to do a hard labor to earn money. I mean, it would be wrong if somebody says to some rickshaw puller, oh, you do meditation and you will be very happy. That's nonsense. He has to think of his own labor and the earning source. So if he is having a problem, so what would be the solution? The solution is that he should put something and make that rickshaw not a manual device, but a mechanical device. So you put anything, I mean, that's how you progress. That is the way to ward off people's sorrow. If suppose you don't have you walk 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers to earn your money. So that becomes very problematic for you. So therefore you require a cycle. And if the cycle is not sufficient enough, therefore you require a motorcycle or some kind of a vehicle where you can go quickly and join your duty and earn more and come back. So this is how you have to ward off the sorrows in the life. That is what the philosophy of Buddha is, and it is not just merely confined to the monastic establishments or anything. So the modern bhikshus or the monks have to conduct themselves, and they need to understand those kind of things. I mean, I'm sorry to say, there are people who do all kinds of things. I don't agree with them, and even the people followers of Ambedkar don't agree with them, and that is why they are not respected. They don't read. I'm sorry to say, they don't read, they don't try to understand, and neither there are institutions where they can be trained accordingly. Yeah, Nitya. Are you?
So there,
हाँ, बोलो.
so there are two questions from Akash, which
हाँ.
are so long, I think we'll need another session for them, but I'll read them
Yeah.
out to you. Okay.
Huh?
What readings would Sir recommend to understand the timeline of this constant wrestling between Hinduism and Buddhism on a grand scale historically? How does Sir see the future of this constant back and forth? The other one is, what is the remedy, according to Sir, for the Indian consciousness that is seemingly becoming senseless, as Sir just mentioned? What changes in education curriculum that Sir would recommend?
We need to change a lot of things in the Indian curriculum. You know, if you see, it is not that if you want to believe in God, it is your choice. Constitution gives you that right and choice. If you don't want to believe in God, the Constitution gives you that choice. The Article 25th of the Indian Constitution makes it very clear that you have every right to propagate your own religion. However, the blind faith and blind belief will always create hindrance to your progress and the masses which are ignorant. So ignorance can only be warded off by right education. It is not that you go in the school and learn ABCD or A, I, E, K, K, G, G or any kind of an alphabet. So you become literate, you become sakshar, you become literate. You can read, you can write, but that does not mean that you become knowledgeable. So I'll give you another example. There is a Bhavar Megwal who wrote his biography. He says that my teacher, who was a geography teacher, in the classroom, he would teach that the sun is a planet. And outside the classroom, when he would attend the shakha, in the shakha, that RSS shakha, he would teach that, oh, the uh, that the sun was a fire of a ball, and Hanuman had gulped it in the throat. So there are these contradictions. So you need to resolve these contradictions. You can't have this kind of a contradictions in the life. So if you want to believe, you believe, but you should not, it should not be a blind faith. It should not be a blind belief. And if you want to do it, you do it in your home. That and it shouldn't be part of your everyday life, in the sense that the the social discriminatory practices and attitude, which if your religion is giving you those kind of practices, those kind of attitude, then it should be completely warded off. That is possible only by the means of education. There are number of people say today we face this problem because the preamble of the constitution is removed from the NCERT books and many of those syllabuses. There is a right from beginning, there is an anti-Ambedkar agenda that is being followed in the country. How? No classes, no section in the textbook on Ambedkar or Phule. And without Ambedkar and Phule, you cannot change Indian society. It is as simple as this. Because no any other leader or any other intellectual will speak about this transformation. Ambedkar is the only figure which talks about transformation in 20th century India. And is the only intellectual figure who is talking about transformation and making people to realize that you should change. The whole idea of how that rational means of education becomes important precisely because if your cultural practices promote blind belief. Say, for example, I'll just give you a small example. In order to drive away COVID, the political leadership in the country asked to clap and flash torchlight. An entire nation was doing it, whether it is educated or uneducated. So I'm not concerned about uneducated, but I'm more concerned about the so-called educated, including so-called doctors, engineers, and everyone. The technical people also, those who are in technical education. Do you think that this happens? I mean, at the behest of someone, you are completely killing your consciousness. That is why I say that we have the consciousness of senselessness. The sensefulness, the mindfulness has to be cultivated through your cultural ethos. It is very important to teach the kid that these are the constitutional means and this is what the Indian Constitution says. And this is what we have to follow in your daily life, whether you worship this God or that God. So this kind of a thinking has to be there. See, there will always be the Vedic and non-Vedic in India, the Brahminic and the Shraman tradition in India. It is the Shraman tradition which is more rational. It is the Shraman tradition which is more accommodative. It is the Shraman tradition which treats human being as a human being and not the guinea pigs and not the the slaves. Whereas the Brahmin tradition has created the slavery, it has created division, it has created. So that is why Ambedkar says in his Annihilation of Caste that caste is not only a division of labor, but also division of laborers. And he also says that in the philosophy of Hinduism, he says that Varna is a perversion. And that is why I say that caste is a perversion. So let us teach our youngsters Annihilation of Caste. In a recent time, one of the film star says that everyone should read Annihilation of Caste to know its own Hindu society. So how important it is. It is only through these means you can change, you can make transformations. there is a contradictions as far as education is concerned in India. As I told you, the example of Bhavar Meghwal, like in the class, what is being taught and what is being believed outside the class. That what you learn in the class, what science you learn in the class does not get replicated, does not get followed in your daily life. So when you go out, you consider this as auspicious, non-auspicious. And then once you see some kind of a cat, you suddenly stop and make a one round of yourself and then move. And you consider it as inauspicious. So in order to ward off this inauspiciousness, you do this kind of a ritual. I mean, which is a sheer nonsense. So you have to refrain, and you have to, get into a better life. So the responsibility is at a multiple level. That cultural sensitivity has to be there. The culture of transformation has to be there. The constitution means had to be taught, not only had to be taught, but also to be implemented very properly. And I'll just give you another example. In the judiciary, there is a process called apprenticeship. And you see who are the people who become, I mean, it is a non-paid apprenticeship for all the High Court and Supreme Court judges. You have that provision of apprenticeship. All the all these people, I mean, it is the judge who selects those people. Whom they select? There is no selection. I mean, despite a person having a good academic record and the merit, despite that, those people are not selected, but only certain caste people are preferred by these by the judiciary of this nation. So that shows how can you expect justice. Justice is very important, and that's why I said, by doing meditation, you don't get justice. Justice is a reality. Justice is something which becomes a backbone of political democracy. The democracy, if you want to make a better nation, then you have to follow that justice. You have to give that equality. You have to give that justice not only in terms of social, but also in terms of political, spiritual, economic, and justice at every level. That has to be there. And that is the reason, that these are the very important ideas which even Dr. Ambedkar, when he writes the draft plan for the government, the opening sentence of the draft plan says that the benefit of the development should go first to the affected population. So Dr. Ambedkar was not thinking about any particular community, caste, religious group, or anything. So you have to tell people that this is what it is, and this is what people want. And when you see constitutional debate and the making of the constitution, you will notice that the constitution is it's a book of collective wisdom. Everyone contributed. Though the large amount becomes an Ambedkar's contribution, but there are people who contributed. And that is what we have to follow in letter and spirit, and every time you have to demand those things. So it's very sad that the political leadership, right from ever since the coming of the constitution, they have completely subverted the constitution. Every political party, I'm telling you, they have subverted the constitution. There is no justice for people, and you can't. An ordinary man cannot come to the Supreme Court. The ways in which people are caught and branded as some group or some this and that, and they are languishing in the jail. Why only scheduled castes, scheduled tribes are constantly arrested under National Security Act ever since this NSA Act came? Today, it is not only the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, but the Muslim minorities are also getting affected. Why it is so? Why only these people, majority of these people are found languishing in the jail? So there is no, so you need to make these corrective measures, which are very important. And that is why Dr. Ambedkar emphasized that idea of ethicality and morality. And that is why we constantly say that you need to have a constitutional morality. You don't have a constitutional morality, therefore you do not do certain things, despite the fact that you are empowered to do those things through the constitution and by the laws and everything. And you need to change that culture of discrimination, the culture of defamation, that culture of mithyavadi. People say that we are living in the post-truth world. I completely disagree. Truth was not existing in India. We are a mithyavati Sanskruti. In a culture of mythic, truth doesn't exist. And you go everywhere, there are it's all the culture of mythic. You need to change that. You see, the Europe has changed a lot, the way they have progressed. So you have the example of how they have progressed. You have your own device and your own, and make a nation a better nation, a livable nation. It is a responsibility of the every citizen of Republic of Government of India to follow it. Yes, Nitya, you are very right that they were the first, the bhikshus were the first class of social servants, and this is an outright, I mean, this is what I think we should, it is Buddha's contribution.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Not least, we need to stop now because my battery is almost dead on my laptop. So before technology shuts us down, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to be sending the recording of this, the link to the Zoom call to whoever signed up, but it's also going to be available on YouTube because technology worked on that also, surprisingly. So this is up on YouTube being shown live. Thank you so much, sir. It's been
Thank you.
what an amazing session. And thank you everyone else who's joined in. I'm looking forward to next week as well, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.